Before we do, Morgan, you had some interesting information you can play us. Dr. Birk has been busy, obviously, as part of this task force, and she had some good information.
Yeah, she had some really interesting stuff to say last week. So let's just roll with that because it's about a 4-minute clip and we don't have a ton of time. So I want you to hear this from the doctor herself.
Sure, many of you saw the recent report out of the UK about them adjusting completely their needs. This is really quite important. If you remember, that was the report that said there would be 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2.2 million deaths in the United States.
Listen
They've
to this.
adjusted that number in the UK to 20,000. So 500,000 to 20,000. We're looking into this in great detail to understand that adjustment. I'm going to say something that's a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try to do it in a way that we can all understand it together. In the model, either you have to have a large group of people who are asymptomatic, who've never presented for any test, in order to have the kind of numbers that were predicted. To get to 60 million people infected, or 6 million people infected, you have to have a large group of asymptomatics, because in no country to date have we seen an attack rate over 1 in 1,000. So either we're only measuring the tip of the iceberg of the symptomatic cases, and underneath it are a large group of people. So we're working very hard to get that antibody test, because that's a good way to figure out who are all these people under here and do they exist. Or we have the transmission completely wrong. So these are the things we're looking at, because the predictions of the models don't match the reality on the ground in either China, South Korea, or Italy. We are about 5 times the size of Italy. So if we were Italy and you did all those divisions, Italy should have close to 400,000 deaths. They're not close to achieving that. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to understand. Models are models. We're adapting now to the reality. There's enough data now of the real experience with the coronavirus on the ground to really make these predictions much more sound. So when people start talking about 20% of a population getting infected, it's very scary. But we don't have data that matches that based on the experience. And then finally, the situation about ventilators. We were reassured in meeting with our colleagues in New York that there are still ICU beds remaining, and there's still significant over 1,000 or 2,000 ventilators that have not been utilized yet.
Listen to that.
Please, for the reassurance of people around the world, to wake up this morning and look at people talking about creating DNR situations, do not resuscitate situations for patients. There is no situation in the United States right now that warrants that kind of discussion. You can be thinking about it in a hospital. Certainly many hospitals talk about this on a daily basis. But to say that to the American people, to make the implication that when they need a hospital bed,
So, I mean, you just think about that. We got to cut it off somewhere, but it's worth going back there and watching. That was her spot from last Thursday. But, you know, like she said, I mean, the news stories Thursday morning were that there were going to be some kind of nationwide DNR, do not resuscitate orders issued for the entire country. Like, if something starts going wrong with you, we're just going to wheel you to the morgue. I mean, that's what they're trying. The media is trying to get people to think about this crisis.
What she was talking about there with the UK study, I read about this about a week ago. The Gateway Pundit talked about this study. This guy came out and said, nope, sorry, I made a mistake, and this is why. Well, let me tell you, just to show you how this information spreads, the last 2 weeks, another show that I work on here at Beasley Media Group, doing stories for that show, 90% of the guests who I interview about the coronavirus and their, for example, Teachers Federation, their union, or the way they're reacting to this, they're basing on numbers in that initial study out of the UK.
Well, we talked about it. I just briefly referred to it as the Imperial College study last week. But, you know, this is what I think scared everybody so much. And this is what put the country into lockdown. And now, you know what? Now the data is not matching the models, so we're readjusting the models. And now 500,000 deaths in the UK are down to, the models are now showing 20,000. So the 2.1 million deaths in the U.S. are now down to what number? I mean, 1/25th of that, So that's a much smaller number, something well under 100,000, something much more in line, maybe, with some of the things that we've had before as some really bad flus, a really bad flu season. And those are the numbers that are being talked about. Now, I'm not saying we should all run back to work right now because it seems like maybe the things that we're doing are helping. But I think one thing to take from this program today is there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. There's a lot of reasons to be hopeful about the future. We've got good detection. We've got good treatment. We've got these things are being approved. We've got plenty of ventilators, and many hundreds of thousands more ventilators are going to be made. If you've been watching the president's briefings, you can hear from the industry leaders. There are plenty of masks. For some reason, areas that are heavily Democratic are reporting shortages of things, and they're finding warehouses like they found in New York with 20,000 ventilators in it. Meanwhile, they're claiming they don't have enough ventilators in New York. Well, the data on the ground is they've got plenty of ventilators in New York, and they've got more in storage than apparently they even know about or are bothering to go and get and activate. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.